ask you. Okay, so if we can get started, Tom, if you'll do the opening prayers, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. The altruistic motivation. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Dang la dang war je pedra, no par je pege. Darpa dang tamche ken pe bardu chopar je pa tamche kiso je pe. Ma nam ka dang yam pe sam chen tamche dewa dang den. Dung ya dang drel nirdu lana me pa yang dang par zope changchu rinpoche da parsha. The action bodhicitta prayer. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. De chedu sangmage ki bardu lugang yisum gewala ko. Ma she bardu lugang yisum gewala ko. Tu de ring ne sung te nima sangda samgi bardu lugang yisum gewala ko. Long refuge prayer. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. Trinchen Sawadang, Girpar Chepe, Palden Lama, Dampa Namla Kayop Suchio. Yedam Kilkorgi Lakshong Namla Kayop Suchio. Sangje Chomdende Namla Kayop Suchio. Dampe Chonamla Kayop Suchio. Pakpe Jendung Namla Kayop Suchio. Pawo Kandro Choyok Sume Sogye Shiki. Chendang Denpa Namla Kayop Suchio. Taking the Bodhisattva vow. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path until I attain the heart of enlightenment. I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Changchu Nyingpo Chiki Bar Sangje Namla Kayop Suchi Chodang Changchu Senpei Shoglayang Deshin Kayop Suchi Jetar Gongyi De Sheki Changchu Dongyi Kepadang Changchu Senpei La Pala Dedang Rimshin Nepata Deshin Drola Pendong Du Changchu Semni Ki Izing Duzin Duni La Pala Rim Par Shindu La Par Gio. Short refuge prayer. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangje Chodang Soki Chongnamla Changchu Bardu Dangi Kayop Suchi Dangi Jinso Jipe Sonamki Drola Penshur Samge Ju Partial. The four measurables. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachments and aversions. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachments and aversions. Manam kadang yampe samchen tamche dewadang dewe yurdang den par jurshi dunyar dang dunyar giyudang drawar jurshi dunyar mepe dewadang mi drawar jurshi nyering jagdang yidang drawe tang yomla nepar jurshi. Lance, I'm going to do the bodhicitta prayer.
Okay.
Last one. Very simple one.
What page number is that for everybody?
That would be page 19, no, 18, no.
18.
18, bottom of 18. bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind. Where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind. Where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. Changchu Semcho Rinpoche Ma Ke Pana Ke Gyoshi Ke Pa Yampa Me Par Yam Gong Ni Gong Du Pel War Shu.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, if everybody has the 4 thoughts to turn the mind to the Dharma, has this text, please. If you can open this up, go to this. If you have it on your computer or you have it in front of you. So we turn to page 1. These are the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma and keep our mind to the Dharma, that we constantly refresh our motivation by daily reciting the 4 thoughts that turn to the mind to the Dharma. So page 1 is precious human life. So if everybody can recite this along with me. The freedoms and advantages so extremely difficult to obtain accomplish the purpose of human life. If one does not achieve benefit from this now, how could this opportunity come again? Oh, this kind of leisure and endowment is supremely difficult to obtain. When one obtains a body, which is easily lost, do not waste it meaninglessly, but rather use it to attain ultimate liberation, joyous result. So now we'll do a contemplation meditation. You can read this quietly to yourself, thinking about the meaning of this. You can turn to pages 7 and 8 here in this text to refresh your memory on the 8 leisures and the 10 endowments. But consider precious human life, that we have a precious human life. Next is page 2 and 3, impermanence. Ka, no matter what has been done, nothing benefits at the time of death. Worldly activities, yes, they are lies. Ka, the 8 worldly dharmas are like a painted rainbow. Think you can put your trust in them? In the certainty of death and knowing that nothing remains long, quickly accomplish liberation. Impermanence makes departure certain, like the shadow of the setting sun. Abandoning laziness and indifference, blaze like fire in fierce diligence. This life is impermanent, like clouds in the autumn sky. Death, birth, and death, migrators, are the same, like actors in a play or dance. The life of beings is like lightning in the sky, like water falling from a steep mountain cliff. It departs quickly, quickly. The nature of all phenomena is impermanence. Death is a certainty to all who are born. Death can descend anytime, like a drop of morning dew on a blade of grass. Quick, it is time to make effort for the essence of the Dharma. Contemplate the meaning of impermanence. Okay. Now turn to page 4, the suffering of samsara. Consider the suffering of beings in the 6 realms of samsara. Doing so, great fear and dread arise in the heart. In the 3 lower realms, and even in the 3 higher ones, there is not an instant of absolute happiness. I will avoid the root cause of my samsaric existence and practice the excellent path of peace to enlightenment. Contemplate the meaning of samsara, the suffering of samsara. You can read this over, read the italics describing human suffering and the 3 higher realms of samsara and the 3 lower realms of samsara. So contemplate the meaning of the suffering of samsara. Now we go to page 5, karma, cause, and result. Even if one were a king, at the time of death, one's possessions, enjoyments, friends, and retinue will not follow. But wherever that sentient being goes, his karma follows after him like a shadow. The fruit of one's positive karma is happiness. Suffering is the fruit of negative karma. The inexorable karmic causation is the mode of abiding in all dharmas. Henceforth, practice the Dharma by distinguishing between what should be practiced and what should be given up. So you can read this again, contemplate your experience with karma, cause and result. Take a very deep breath, hold it. Exhale very completely. Squeeze all that negative, stale, dark air out and hold that empty breath. Okay, relax and breathe. Open your eyes. Thank you. Anybody have any questions or comments about the four thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma? Okay. And we're going to finish. We didn't complete talking about karma, cause, and result. So I'm looking at the outline book that you all have, page 9. I think I sent everybody a little card that has the 10 non-virtues and the 10 virtues on the sides of the card, so you can look at this. So this is very, it's very, very fundamental, very basic, and very easily taken for granted. But we need to understand what the 10 non-virtues are, and then to understand what the other side of that is. What are the virtues? What are the virtuous things that we do to overcome that? So the 10 non-virtues here are explained as there's 3 of the body, 4 of the speech, and 3 of the mind. So the 3 of the body are taking a life, killing someone, stealing, taking possessions, taking that which is not given, is the way it's many times expressed, taking that which is not given, and stealing, or stealing. And then the third one is sexual misconduct. So that's a wide range of things, but sexual misconduct, I think, means violating someone's private space. So whether it's a man or a woman, whatever, by doing something that is robbing that person of their private space might be considered as sexual misconduct. So these are very fundamental. We don't want to kill anybody. We don't want to kill our mother, our father. We don't want to kill an arhat. We don't want to kill animals. We don't want to kill insects and so on. There is an awareness that we do eat animals. We may eat insects, and it may be because that some people might say that we come from not just a culture that eats animals, but that we are designed to eat animals and to digest animals and so on. Our teeth, our digestion system, and so on like that. So we're not going to get into the argument about that. We talked about this a time or so ago. We talked about this. We have to take responsibility, though, that if we are taking the life of an animal, of another being for the sake of eating, for an insect or something, that we recognize that we may be liberating it, and we are what we eat. So we're bringing that into our lives and being able to have that be part of who we are. So we need to recognize that and to take responsibility for that. Stealing is, of course, an important thing, that we don't go, robbing people of possessions. We don't go stealing people's position, doing things behind their back that causes great harm to them and their families. So we don't want to take with that which is not given to us. So whether it is to an individual or it is to an institution, that stealing, trying to rob somebody or trying to take advantage of the paying taxes or having to pay your telephone bill or what have you, is all part of that. And we carry that responsibility with us, that when we are taking advantage of something, when we are stealing from somebody or some institution, that we're carrying a liability with us by doing that. And somewhere along the line, there is a catching up. Sexual misconduct is very terrible. Some people who have been taken advantage of at any time in their life, whether they're young or they're old or whatever, sometimes may feel that they would rather have been killed. That is very serious. They carry that pain and that suffering with them of being sexually violated in one way or another their whole entire lives. So in many ways, sexual misconduct is a very, very terrible thing. And it gets covered up with lies. It gets covered up with great guilt and covered up with pain and suffering, maybe on both sides. The person who perpetrated the sexual misconduct and those who were violated. So it's very serious and needs to be considered as being very serious. So these are the three of the body. The four of the speech. And the speech, remember, is part of the agent of the brain. What we think of when we think of things and we articulate that, it becomes our speech or our actions. These come from results of thoughts that we have and so on. So whether it's speech or whether it's conduct, whether it's actions, same thing. So the four non-virtues of the speech are: number one is lying, number two is divisive speech, number three is harsh words, and number four is idle talk. So lying, we all know about lying, I think, whether it is a deep lie that is taking advantage of other people, or it's a white lie to be able to lessen what we might rationalize as lessening the pain of somebody. Or let me tell them a white lie that it's okay to do this, that, or the other thing, or something like that. We still have a responsibility about that. We have a responsibility to ourselves. We have a responsibility to the person that we lied to. Sometimes we'll tell a lie and we don't realize that we're telling a lie, but at some point we wake up to that. We come to realize, oh, what I was doing was really something that I was misinformed on. Maybe I had the wrong idea. I wasn't taught properly, or maybe I didn't listen properly. So this lying has many causes to it, and we have to examine the things that we say. And as we're saying things, I know this happens to myself all the time. I'm listening to myself as I say things, and I might catch myself and say, I'm telling a lie right now. And maybe it's, I can rationalize it many different ways. And I have to take responsibility for that. So how I take responsibility for it and how I correct it is something that I have to live with, that I have to recognize. And sometimes I have to say something like, oh no, I'm making a mistake, I'm saying the wrong thing, or I'm misleading you, or something like that. Let me correct that. Let me fix that right now. Or maybe it's something that you think about a day or two later, and then you need to come back and you need to be able to correct it then. Or maybe it's something that you've believed for a very long time, for years and years, and you've been telling this lie for a very long time. And now all of a sudden you turn around and you realize that that what I've been saying all this time was a lie. Now I have to correct that by telling people and talking to people, explaining to people how I made those mistakes, what it was that led me to the lie, and what it is that recognized that lie, and how it is that I'm correcting that lie. So lying is very serious.
Lance,
Yes, sir.
I'm struggling to think of an example, but I know that there have been in my lives where, for instance, let me give you a hypothetical example. Someone may have done something inadvertently and not necessarily irresponsibly, but the consequence of what they did was really bad. That it caused harm either to a process or to a person, but it was not their intent, and they didn't deliberately do it, and possibly there was no way they could have avoided doing it. But they are feeling very badly. They are taking it as their fault. And you relieve them of that by, some people will call it interpreting what was done, but really the bad event happened because of a mistake that this person made, not intentionally, and sometimes for reasons that they couldn't
Understand. Yeah, you said that.
And so is that the kind of lie you're talking about? Do you have to say, yeah, well, this is a result of what you did, and you may not have known this, that, or the other, but
Sure. And sometimes we enable people to get away with lies. And then that becomes a karma onto us. That becomes a karma for us. Somebody's doing something bad, we help them to rationalize it. And then knowing that it's a false, it's a false analogy or a false rationalization. So now we're taking on some of that lie for ourselves. So yeah, so we have to analyze this. We have to look at this. We have to logically look at this and bring to bear all the things that we've experienced in our lifetimes and so on. We can't escape the responsibility for this. So that may not be directly answering your question, because the answer is we take responsibility for it, and each and every situation is going to be a little bit different. There's all kinds of myriad things that come together. And we're going to talk maybe a little bit about some more of that when we on the next page. But we always have responsibility for whatever virtue we do and whatever non-virtue we do, whatever the cause may be. There may be mitigating things to it that may lessen the severity of it, but still we have a responsibility toward it.
So lying does not necessarily imply intent.
Intent does have a bearing on it. Yes, and intention does have a bearing on it. That you're telling a lie, to rationalize that you think you're helping somebody. So you're telling a white lie to help them along with their pain and suffering. And so on, something like that. It lessens it, but at the same time, it's still a lie.
So what Gary was talking about, an inadvertent, not necessarily irresponsible from the vantage point of the person who told it. And that suggests to me there was no intent. And I've always thought lying implied intent.
No, well, when you realize that there's a lie, then you should have an intention to want to correct the lie. So if we're raised to think, one thing or another, and we continue through all our life thinking about this one thing or another, But then as soon as we realize the truth of it, now we have an obligation to change. And this is being a human being. This is what a human being uniquely can do out of the 6 realms of being a human being. This is what the human being has the ability to change. So then we'll come back to this because as we get to the next page, you'll see there's more stuff involved here. So divisive speech is the next part of non-virtue. Divisive speech is causing a division between the family, causing a division between between your workplace, causing a division in the sangha and the group of people that you're with, whatever. Divisive speech is being able to hurt people by dividing people. And sometimes you're only working on one side and you're just talking to somebody about one thing, but you're not helping the other side. You're not doing anything for the other side to be able to meet. You're not trying to bring people together. You're just simply driving a wedge between people. So this divisive speech is a non-virtue. And I think at one time or another, we've all been guilty of that. And we certainly can see, how this is played out in our politics, how it's played out in our lives, how it's played out in so many different ways. So we can recognize the result of that. And many people will try and rationalize that in many different ways and so on. But when we see that it's dividing people rather than bringing people together, then we can say this is divisive speech. And we're guilty for causing that, for having the action of doing that. The causes for it may be many causes, and we can rationalize those causes, but the actualization of doing that, the activity of doing that, is the karma. So then the next one is harsh words. Harsh words means that sometimes you might be in a position to give constructive criticism, to be able to talk to somebody and be able to correct them. But sometimes we do it very, very harshly. And we yell at them, we raise our voices, we beat on a table, we call them names, all kinds of things, to accent our anger. And what we're hoping to do is to make them realize the severity of what they're doing. But at the same time, it might have a tendency to push them back into a corner. And all they recognize is that harshness coming from you, and they're not really getting to the root of what it was that was their motivation for having said something or done something that was, in your mind, causing this harsh speech. So if we're going to correct somebody, if we're going to say something to somebody, we should find a way to do it politely and pleasingly rather than having harsh words and making somebody very upset as a result of that. It just compounds the non-virtue. Then the next one is idle talk. Idle talk is gossip. Talking about people behind their backs, talking about people, repeating a story that may or may not be true, but we're not sure, but we're repeating the story. And so this kind of idle talk can be very, very hurtful to a lot of people. And when we do this, we're hurting ourselves because we start propagating rumors like that. So we should not engage in idle talk. We should not engage in gossip. We should need to learn to be able to keep quiet. If we don't have something good to say, we shouldn't say anything at all. We have to recognize that our words have a great deal of power, just like our actions have a great deal of power. So we need to be very circumspect about those things and be able to control ourselves to not bring these non-virtues through these 4 modes of speech. Then the next are the three non-virtues of the mind. So the three non-virtues of the mind, the first one is covetedness. I always have a hard time pronouncing that. Covetedness. This is where we are having this envy for something or someone or something like that. And this is very insidious because it may not be forward in our minds. We may not be recognizing it, but it's like in the back of our head. It's in the back of our mind. And it becomes this insidious motivation for us to do non-virtuous things, to think non-virtuous things, why we are doing something, why we want something, or why we're trying to get over on somebody, is through this covetousness that we want what they have. We are envious of what they have, and we're using this as a means to be able to hurt other people. We're hurting ourselves. It's hurting our own mind. It stays in our own mind, in the back of our mind, and it manifests in many different ways, this covetousness. Harmful thought is when we are thinking that someone has done something bad, and now you want something bad to happen to them. And you take joy when that happens. And it may not be that you have anything to do with it. A classic example of this is when you're a teenager or young 20-something or in a relationship and somebody hurts you really bad, and you say to them something like, I may not be the one to do it, but somebody's going to hurt you really bad, and I'm really going to enjoy when that happens. So that's an example of harmful thought. And being able to carry that through and be able to extend that now into many other things that we do. And we see how people are getting over on people in big ways, whether they're rich people that are taking advantage of poor people, and there's politicians who are taking advantage of people who have no voice in government and so on. And we're thinking to ourselves, gee, I wish something really bad happens to that person, that they can't run again, that they lose their office, that some kind of scandal comes and is revealed as according, because of what this person is doing. We recognize them. I recognize them as being an evil person. Now I want that, for somebody else to recognize that, who's in a position to really punish this kind of person. So having this harmful thought, you see, feeds in your mind. And it kind of justifies your being able to be non-virtuous when other circumstances come up. The more that you do negative things, the more justified you feel that you can continue doing negative things. The more you do positive things, the more that you recognize how much better you feel, and how harmless, or how you are removing harm from other people, or how you're not projecting harm onto other people. So recognizing harmful thought as being something that is non-virtuous is very important. And then the last one is wrong views. Sometimes this is called wrong worldviews, but what this really means is having the ideas that simply that there is no karma, that there is no retribution, that I can go and do anything to anybody at any time, and there's no retribution to me for having done these non-virtuous things to somebody else. That there's this wrong view that I can get away with this, that there is no sense of morality. The only sense of morality that someone like that might have is the sense that if they do something, they might wind up in prison. They might wind up in some kind of court. They might wind up being accosted by somebody who is protecting someone that you're taking advantage of. So it's out of that fear that they are going to have some kind of retribution taking against them, that they will pull back and they will behave like there's a virtue there. but it's not a virtue. It's only their fear that something is worse is going to happen to them. So this is a wrong view, to have that view, rather than looking at the virtuous, looking at the responsibility that we have. That if we do good things will happen to us. That there is a natural law of reciprocity. That we do good things will happen to us. If we do bad things will happen to us. And this is something that bears, examination. This is something that we should take a look at in our lives and so on, and be able to see where there might have been turning points in our lives and so on, and how we made decisions to adopt a proper point of view that brings happiness to ourselves and no suffering to ourselves, and happiness to others and no suffering to other beings. So, as I said, these things are so basic. These things are so fundamental that they're very easily taken for granted. But when we begin to really think about the things that we do, and when we sit down, when we take those times, whether it's the first thing in the morning, or it's during the middle of the afternoon, or it's last thing before we go to bed or something like that, and we say, okay, I'm going to take 15 or 20 minutes and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to quiet my mind. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to contemplate. The thoughts that come up are the thoughts of what harm did I do? Or what happiness did I bring? And we begin to go through those things, and we have to be able to compartmentalize those things in some way or another. And then we got to be truthful to ourselves. Are we compartmentalizing virtue, or are we compartmentalizing non-virtue? And we begin to recognize that and take responsibility for it. Yes, Gary.
With apologies, Lat,
Okay.
I can't let go of the question of lying. And here is the reason why. And there's probably someone here who can express it much better than I can, but my Jewish background and training calls me under Jewish law in certain circumstances to lie to save a life. Not only that, and I know of stories, one in particular in general, where someone who is not a Jew, who was a prisoner of war, was asked by the Nazis for all the Jewish prisoners of war to be named. And this particular person was the leader of the prisoners of war. He was an American. And he said, "We are all Jews here." They weren't. That was a lie. So my understanding of my Jewish education and faith is that a lie is sometimes required ethically by the faith.
Well,
that's what I believe.
Well, I appreciate that. And I can't, be a good person to argue it. I'm not a good debater, but I don't think that it relieves us of the responsibility of telling the lie. That we still have a responsibility to recognize the lie, know that we tell the lie. We may have had some, noble rationalization for doing it, but at the same time, we have to recognize what is truth and what is not truth. And I think that we have an obligation to ourselves to be able to do that. Otherwise, there's all kinds of other rationalizations that we'll create in many different ways. And then it just blurs the line between, what it is to be a human being and being able to tell the difference between virtue and non-virtue. It's only the human being who can do that. So that's the way I look at it. I'm not a good debater. I can't argue, more than that, just to point that out. That's the training that I have, that we have responsibility. So however we...
Lance,
Yes.
This is Grant. I
Yes,
mean,
Jim.
to me, there's a total difference between the micro and the macro scale. I mean, at the macro scale, we take life every day. Everything is like a cost benefit analysis in terms of the air pollution, standards that we set. We know it's going to kill a certain number of people, but it's going to, save another amount. We put a cost on that human life. Drug safety, any type of immunization. It's you weigh the costs versus the benefits, and I mean that's just how it works at the macro scale. And I think for the most part, that's how people would want it to work. So once again, I see, I understand at the micro scale that, these things make sense, but at the macro scale, especially the taking human life, makes absolutely no sense to me.
Okay, well, you make, you point something out, a practical, application of that point of view. So I understand. My point is we still have responsibility toward it. So now let's go to the other side of this and look at what the 10 virtues are. That with each of these non-virtues, there is a virtue. So with the virtues of the mind, the three of the body, which is killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, then if we protect the lives of others, if we're protecting the lives of others instead of killing. So now using Grant's example, if we're going through to develop, different medicines or so on, and we're using animals as some kind of test animals to be able to perfect these medicines, to be able to save many lives, well, there's a rationalization there. There is that the means or the outcome justifies the means. So if we take responsibility for that and say, okay, that's true, we understand that, and we go through some kind of liberation for that being and for ourselves and so on, carrying that while still carrying that responsibility, carrying that burden, then there is a mindfulness there. That this is what we did, so protecting the lives of others in any way that we can. Are there other ways that we can develop things without having to do these things? Or is it become the easy way to be able to just use these other beings, to experiment with or something like that as a means to be able to get knowledge? But is there something else that may be harder for us to do, but maybe that's what we need to do? The next one will be stealing, taking that which is not given. So practicing great generosity, that no matter what we have, if we want something and we're willing to steal for it, that maybe we should say, okay, I've got something and I need to be able to practice generosity by giving something. And by giving something, I feel much greater than the guilt that I feel from having stolen something. So doing this over and over again develops this generosity, this opening up of being able to share rather than hoarding, than being greedy and so on like that. And it can be expressed in many different ways. It can be expressed if you're going into, the top drawer of your mother's bureau and taking $10 out, or that you're allowing, you're investing in stocks and bonds and so on, that whose targets are people who don't have any better sense, and they're investing their life savings in these stocks and bonds, and you know that you're buying them up, and you know that they're going to go bankrupt at some time, but you don't care. You know, that's another example of something like that. So being able to be generous with what you have and being satisfied with having less than thinking that you need to have more is a key to happiness, is a key to freedom, is a key to liberation. So we have to think in those terms. We have to change and think in those terms. We have to look at our rationalizations. The next one is sexual misconduct. So instead of practicing sexual misconduct, if we maintain moral ethics, and recognize the pain that we're doing, you know, by trying to get over on somebody that is robbing them of their self-respect, of their humanness. You know, these kinds of crimes that are done on people, you know, through sexually and so on, like I said before, scars them for their entire lives. And they may suppress it for many, 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 many years. And then suddenly, you know, some circumstance comes up, the right causes and conditions come up, and then all of a sudden these neuroses pop up and these fears pop up from these things that happened to them when they're young and so on like that. So we have to have a moral ethics. We have to use our lives as a guidepost. Would we want to have these things happen to us? And how do we teach these moral ethics to our children and so on? And how do they grow up with that? And how do we deal with people who have poor moral ethics? You know, how is that treated? So we have to look at this and once again, take responsibility for it. Sometimes, you know, it requires, you know, some kind of medical attention. It takes some kind of, training, a recognition, and so on. So we have to deal with that in a very intelligent, a very adult way. So those are three of the body. The three of the speech is that in lying, that we always speak the truth. That we always speak the truth, no matter how difficult it may be to ourselves and to others. If we make a habit of speaking the truth, there may be repercussions by speaking the truth, but we have to be responsible for those, just as we have to be responsible for the lies that we tell and so on. So we have to judge. We have to do that. And I appreciate what Gary was saying, you know, but we have to be responsible for that. We have to speak the truth. When we talk in the four thoughts that turn them, in the Four Noble Truths, and we talk about the Eightfold Path. The third of the Eightfold Path is to always speak the truth. That if we speak the truth, then we don't have to cover up with lies. And if we don't know the truth, then we just say, I don't know. I just don't know. You know, to use the example that we're all Jews and you know, if you're going to take one, you got to take us all. You know, I appreciate that, and I might be the first one to do something like that too. But I'm just saying that we have to know the truth. We have to be able to understand that. So speaking the truth. The next one is divisive speech. So instead of divisive speech, splitting people apart, that we harmonize those who are unfriendly. Instead of trying to marginalize people because you don't like what they do or what they say, instead we find ways to bring people together instead of continually separating them and using their actions and their words to further separate people. Find the commonality between it, harmonize, start from that position there. And if we did that as human beings in our families and our friendly relationships in our neighborhoods and our communities and in our nations and so on, what we can see what a result would be, the kind of result. It may be idealistic, but at the same time, we have to work for some kind of morality. We have to work for some kind of idealism. We can't rationalize the non-virtue and expect that we are going to be able to escape the retribution of that, which is negative karma. The next one, harsh words, is overcome by speaking peacefully and politely. Speaking peacefully and politely. So if you have issues with somebody, something they've said, something they've done, and so on, to maybe pull them aside, not do it in front of everybody, but say, look, you know, I got a bone to pick with you. You know, there's something we got to talk about that you did that I think that, you know, we need to understand each other a little bit better. You know, why did you do that? Get them to own what they did, get them to recognize it, get them to be able to correct themselves, rather than you got to do this. You feel like grabbing them by the lapels and shaking them, you know, your harsh speech, your manner, and so on. But if you get them to open up to you, sometimes so that they can correct themselves, becomes much, much more productive. So that they are, so we're speaking peacefully to them, we're speaking politely to them, you know, and we can see that we've lost that, you know, in our politics and so on. You know, whichever side of the fence you happen to be on, there's this great fence that seems to be getting wider and wider between people. And there's not this coming together that we're all the same people. We're all human beings, you know, whether you want to look at it on a global scale or you want to look at it on a national scale, or you want to look at it on a family scale or whatever, you know, it's by harmonizing and by bringing people together that there's an opportunity to be able to help things rather than make things worse than they already are. Then the last thing is idle talk. And the idle talk, the gossiping, is when we speak meaningfully. Meaningfully means that we recognize that we know the meaning of what it is that we're saying. And if we don't know the meaning, if we're just spreading a rumor, then we should just shut up and not say anything. If we don't understand completely, you know, just say, I'm not going to get into that conversation, or I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk out of that conversation because it's going on. You're at the dinner table or something and the relatives are over and they start going and everything, you know, and you see that there's no opportunity for you to be able to bring it together, to harmonize it. So you just got to get out of the situation, if that's what maybe has to happen. So we have to practice meaningfulness, you know, of what we say. And maybe somebody will respect that you're leaving and they may come after you and say, well, why are you leaving? What do you have to say about this? And you say, well, I'll tell you, but you all have to calm down and let me express myself. That we speak meaningfully about the situation. And we can let people talk, but they need to talk meaningfully. They need to, and when we catch somebody who is going off on tangents and just repeating rumors and so on, we need to be able to call that out. But if they're not going to respond to that, then it may be like, you know, sitting underneath of a waterfall and trying to stop the waterfall. It's just impossible in that particular time and space. And you need to be able to judge your times for conversation, for arguments, and so on. You need to be able to judge your times and know how strong you are to be able to defend those things that you're trying to bring up, to discuss, and so on. So speaking meaningfully, practicing, how's it say, speaking meaningfully, all goes to this, to be able to overcome the non-virtue of idle talk.
Lance?
Yes.
Could you give an example? Oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca, you have your hand up. Do you want to go?
Do you mind, Zara?
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Lance, what do you do when you have someone who is not, when you are engaging with someone who is not capable of living by this, has no interest in it, and their objective seems to be on the non-virtuous side of the card?
That's right.
How do you respond to that?
That's actually my question too. Could you give an
Oh,
example?
high five, Zara.
That's actually, yeah, that's my question. What would be an example of a real conversation you've had, Lance, in your life where you're like opting out of those interactions, like to someone's face saying, hey, listen, I'm not in, like, what does that look like? The pragmatics of it, like functionally, like
Sure.
you're
Yeah. I've lost lots of friends. You know, I'm a friendly guy. I make friends real easy, but I can also leave friends real easy too. When I see that they're non-virtuous or that I'm becoming non-virtuous in their company, then it's very easy to leave. And so we have to decide, are we going to be part of that and realizing that I'm not going to be able to make a difference. It's beyond my ability to be able to do it. So I say, okay, I just have to divorce myself from that situation, from that relationship, from that community, and be able to do that and not look back. Well, you may look back, you may want to examine. I shouldn't be that rigid about it. But my point is that you say, okay, this isn't going to work, I'm going to leave. That's all. You're not going to change them. And I'm sure you all have those situations. And in your families, you may say, well, I can't leave my family. You know, so, you know, you got to gird yourself for that time when the family is getting together. And maybe you have to establish some rules that you can get, you know, a number of people to agree with and say, we're not going to be talking about these things during the time that we're together, you know? And if you can't abide by that, please don't come. And then if the situation gets out of hand, and then the people who you've already talked to, because you anticipated that, then you all walk out en masse and leave that person or persons who are sitting there at the dinner table arguing just between themselves. Everybody else leaves. Maybe then they start getting a message. So there's no easy answer, except to say that you just have to be able to use wisdom to be able to protect your own virtue and the virtue of those that are around you, and not be pulled into the non-virtue of what somebody else might be causing. So that's my experience with it. Sometimes we develop wisdom. You know, this year, I may not have the wisdom to be able to argue, but we find a year later, maybe I've got some better wisdom. I got more skillful means to be able to do it. But having said that, there are still people I cannot talk to. You know, I know that. And, you know, so we establish the rules, or I just don't go. Does that help? Does that make sense to you? Is that a solution, or what do you think about that?
It makes sense, but it doesn't help.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. I think the issue is probably that each of us within our relationships we have, depending on the nature of the relationship and how often some things, like you said, are just easy to slowly shape out of it, right? Like you stop calling the person where you don't have to see them at work, but like it depends on how close they are by nature of like the relationship. Are they family? Like, do you see them at Thanksgiving versus every single day of your life? So I think the practicality of it is we have to get over, there's an ego part of us, whereas like, we don't want to make other people uncomfortable with maybe what we need to say that could be said kind and compassionately without being like the intention being like, I'm trying to hurt your feelings. I'm actually not trying to do that. I'm trying to get good karma for both of us right now. But you're not going to understand that. So instead I have to find a compassionate way to say words so that it neutralizes how this may feel for you. You're going to feel like I'm abandoning you, but in fact, by enabling you, I'm creating bad karma for both of us and these interactions. And I don't know, that's my struggle, Rebecca, is I worry about hurting people's feelings. I worry too much about hurting other people's feelings and having that direct of a conversation.
Sometimes, by calling somebody out, calling Culling, you're calling them, by bringing somebody out of, being in a situation and being able to sit down and have a one-to-one with them and saying, why are you saying this? Why are you thinking this? And trying to get them to open up as to what what's led them to this may get them to be able to see your point. It may be that you've already tried that and that's not going to work. And you have to find the point at which you stop, following that tack. And then you have to just leave, like I said.
I sort of resonate with Rebecca's comment, as I often do, about what did you say? It makes sense, but it's not helpful. And I don't know that I'd put it just like that, but what I'm wary of is when I start structuring situations according to my idea, my concept about meaningfulness and my concept about virtue, and I'm like setting rules that I'm saying you either abide by them or I'm out of here. At times that other people have done that with me when I have felt that I had something meaningful to say, or I have felt that I had an idea of virtue that wasn't synonymous with theirs, and they've just simply declared, essentially, we're going to operate on my concept of meaningfulness and my concept of virtue. Otherwise, we're not going to operate at all. I mean, I've found that divisive. Now, exactly.
Well, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure. Yeah.
Let me point out, we grew up, you and I, and I think maybe the rest of us, for years, we grew up that in company, you don't talk about politics and you don't talk about religion, right? And you don't talk about somebody else's spouse.
Right.
But that seems to be out the window now.
Right.
And that's what people are arguing about, is about religion and about politics, and maybe not so much about each other's spouse, but those two is what the conversation is going on in the world right now. How did this get out of control and how do we get it back under control?
Why is it out of control?
What's that?
Why is it out of control?
Well, I don't know. Why would you say it's out of control?
No, I don't have the vision that it's out of control. People, this is just, I think with the media, more people are aware of the fact that other people think or express themselves differently. But my
maybe they feel emboldened, they feel empowered, and that they're, is there a truth and an alternative truth?
Well, to go back to the point,
we abide in that?
To go back to the point of out of control, it's probably always been this way. It's just that we're more aware now because of the media.
Well, maybe so. So going back to, the answer to this is that you choose who your friends are. You choose the relationships. You choose the events that you take part in. And it may be painful, or you choose to go with them, and you just have to, put blinders on. You have to close your ears to some of it, and in a few hours it'll be over.
Well, if I can, this thought occurred to me that I would prefer for myself to have some interior gyroscope that kept my balance rather than walking on a tightrope and mentally trying to constantly provide some feedback to my feet and my arms and so on, that I'm balanced just so and don't fall off that wire. That seems like a very tedious way to go through life, to have all kinds of rules, no matter how noble the rules are. And it fills one's head up with just a lot of confusing thoughts.
Well, and that's a very noble thing, because what you're saying is that you realize that all this is happening and that I'm not going to play the game, but I still need to be in the mix of things because that's the nature of my life. That's the nature of phenomenal world of samsara, and I got to be in that, but I know the reality of it, and I'm just not going to play the game, but yet it doesn't disturb me to be in that midst of that. So we get over the emotion of being upset by the things that we hear and see people saying and acting upon and so on, saying, oh, well, that's part of samsara.
Is abusive behavior part of samsara?
Well, it happens in samsara, sure.
Yeah.
It's part of it, yeah. It's part of the manifestation of it, yeah. And it's terrible.
Should one have as a target to be okay with it? Like to be able to be with it without suffering?
Well, it's a good question, a really fair point. And the answer again is liberation. That these things happen. We do what we can to ameliorate these things, to be able to harmonize these things. But yet, when there seems to be no course to be able to do that, then the only thing to do is to vacate.
There, thank you.
Otherwise, then you wind up being drawn into doing the abuses yourself. And that becomes an argument of self-defense. I killed somebody in self-defense. So what that implies in the mind of a Buddhist is you thought that your life was more important than their life.
Right. But when I judge situations by my concept of meaningfulness, I'm saying my concept of meaningfulness is superior to yours. It's tricky.
It's tricky, so this is why we stay with people that we love and people that we trust and people who are our community, and why we make the changes that we do in our lifetimes. I'm sure you've all been through situations where you have left groups of people, when you were a teenager, when you were 20-something, people you went to college with, people you went to work with, you don't want to deal with them anymore. Or maybe they don't want to deal with you.
Well, my experience with that is not so much seeking out people that think exactly like I do, but are more open to looking at things. Whereas some individuals and some groups of individuals have like a very rigid outlook.
Sure. Well, let's move on to these 3 virtues of the mind. So first is the non-virtue of covetedness. And to overcome covetedness, if we practice unattachment, if we are if we're coveting something, we want something, we're envious of something, we're jealous of something, but if we practice unattachment, that I don't need those things, it kind of cuts off that root of our wanting that and of our thinking of that being in the back of our mind. If I can live simpler If I can live without those things, how much more free I become, how much happier I become, how much more satisfied I become just in being who I am, living within my means, living within myself, and so on. So by practicing unattachment, we're cutting off our root of envy, of covetousness. Harmful thought, which was thinking that somebody else should, who should have to pay for the things that they did to me or to somebody else. If we practice loving kindness all the time, and loving kindness is also wisdom, is a way of expressing wisdom. And wisdom sometimes is having grace, being able to have the ability to be able to talk with someone, to be able to understand somebody and have them understand themselves, have them understand you, and so on. So being able to have wisdom, to be able to have loving kindness for somebody, to have the grace, to have the forgiveness for somebody. And I know that's really hard, but yet that is part of the answer. That's what we need to do. That is the ideal of what it is that we need to do. We look at these things and we're watching television, or we're in the, after Thanksgiving or something. Why can't everybody just love each other and get along with each other? What's it going to take for that to happen? But that's the ideal. And how, do we lose the ideal for the practicality of the conflict? What do you think about that? Do we lose the ideal for the practicality of the conflict?
Well, I think a good course would be to have practical Buddhism, the application in everyday life of Buddhist principles.
Mhm.
Because the presentations, at least the textual presentations, are essentially very high prose, very noble thoughts. And I can't speak for other people, but I've not led a completely virtuous, pure life. So I'm living in the everyday world, and I'm not getting much out of all those noble texts as to how to deal with everyday situations. Yes, be kind. Yes, be generous. Don't lie. Don't steal. I got that. But then the immediate situation comes up any day, any moment. You can't say, well, I don't like these people and walk away. The other day I said, leave a conversation with somebody that you disagree with. This person was having an argument. So yes, sometimes it is best to walk away, but you can't walk away all the time.
Why not?
Pardon me?
Why not? So does that mean if you're not walking away that you're acquiescing to the conflict?
Conversations like this remind me of a situation where I asked a Lama about not killing. And his answer, very quick, was, it's a trap. Don't get stuck in a trap. You drink a glass of water, and not every place has purified water. Your stomach acids are going to be killing the germs in the water. So just by being alive, you're engaged in the act of killing. So get over it. Don't get stuck there.
Lance,
Yes.
going back to your question, the one you posed to the group, you were talking about like arguing, like like the situation, is that just also recognizing like the core idea is that you like it, you like being in the cycle of suffering, like you're attached to it and it's too hard to let go, you're not ready to let go. So walking away, like you're describing, is in some sense recognizing like that's like a huge, I think, point of transcendence for some people when they recognize like a light bulb, like, oh, I'm choosing to walk away, I'm not going to attach to this pattern of, I don't know. I'm trying to think about what you're asking, like do a dive with you into the question. And I'm thinking like the need to recognize, am I attached to this cycle of drama basically, or can I like knowingly walk away, like, and be okay from letting go of those patterns?
Was that the question of idealism giving way to joining the conflict? Was that the question?
Well, I think I was thinking, yes, that was the question. And I think also there was like the practice.
Yeah, I think and I think, we struggle with that. I struggle with that, because I create my own tension. I create my own stress. And I'm at the age now where I'm saying, why do I keep doing this? I'm the one who's making myself do these things. Nobody's making me do these things. Why am I doing it? And is it time for me to walk away from it? Can I have, my last 20 years, if I can live 20 more years, can I make them really good years where I don't have this tension? And I'm thinking about it. But to do that, I'm going to have to walk away from some things. The things that I've been doing and the things that I enjoy doing. And I got a rationale that I'm helping other people. But now it's getting down to, okay, well, what do I need to do? Did I help enough? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I go back to a brief exchange that you and Thomas had, where he said you can't always walk away, and you said why not? And the danger of this kind of thing is that you can nitpick it down to a point where it has no vitality left, and I don't want to do that. But Thomas is right. Well, if I'm retired, but I've been in work situations where I acted a certain way that did not match my idealism, because I didn't want to suffer the practical consequences. Your boss or somebody in your organization or somebody just does something that's totally beyond the pale, or at least that's your judgment of it. But you have to absorb a certain amount of that stuff. Well, no, maybe you don't, but you recognize that if you don't absorb a certain amount of it, the consequences, can be significant. And so we have to evaluate those costs. And I think at times for all of us, whether we measure it consciously or not, the costs are too high.
You have to change jobs a lot if you hold
exactly
this line in the DC area. And let's just go with that.
Right. And then and then there have been other instances where, I don't know, occasionally one of my children has gotten into something where I felt the need to, in order to set an example for them, or in order to demonstrate my commitment to them, I rose up in a situation I would rather have walked away from.
Oh, that's happened to you too, Ed?
Yeah. So just to say, well, if it doesn't, I don't know, this is not exactly what you're saying, Lance, but if it doesn't suit you, or if it conflicts with your with your view of virtue or meaningfulness, well, you're just out of there. I don't mean to trivialize what you're saying, but that's a hell of a load.
Well, this is something here that you call practice.
Yeah.
This is practice. You're practicing being perfect. And each one of us, the responsibility that we take, and a lot of times we take responsibility on that we really don't have the responsibility for.
Well, it's true.
And we want to jump in there and we want to do something that isn't our thing to do. But
Yeah.
what this is all about is really very simple. It's practice. We have to practice being this way. When we started out with 0 problems. And of course, we didn't have to change our diaper either. So now we're up to the point that we got to change our diaper, and we've got to cipher those problems. So it's always a choice.
All right,
Right.
so now let's put what we're talking about is karma. Karma means action. So action happens as the result of a cause. There's a cause, there's a thought that is motivating us to take some particular action. And then that action has a result. And then we have to abide by that result, whether it was a good result or a bad result or a neutral result. So what we're learning to do is to examine the causes, examine the potentials of the actions, and to be able to understand what the consequences of those actions are going to be. What we do, what the idealism of the Buddhism is, of this system, and maybe there's other systems too, but I'm not going to discuss other systems. We're dealing with this right now. And the idea here is to liberate oneself from karma, to liberate oneself from karma, from action, so that we're not making new karma. This is how we liberate ourselves. This is how we're not being tied to the things that we do. Because if we do good things, then the potential is we get attached to those good things. We get attached to peace. Remember the attachment to peace? We were talking about that a couple of weeks ago. We get attached to that. And then that becomes something that pulls us down, pulls us back. But if we can liberate from this life of being a human being, what it is to be a human being, and see, as Thomas says, all these traps, every time we turn around, there's another trap. So if we can neutralize all the karma, if we can neutralize all the things, so what does this mean? It means we become boring. It means we don't have as many friends as we used to. It means we don't engage in the conversations. We don't do all these things because what are we preparing for? We're preparing for death. And when we go to death, it's all gone anyway. And then there's this whole other thing that we know nothing about. And we're hoping that that other thing is better than what we got here. But all that we know is that if I neutralize this karma, if I live this simpler life and so on, you know what? There's a happiness within me. There's a a satisfaction within me. There's a love and compassion, joy and equanimity within me that I can abide with. And I'll share that with everyone that I can. But if they're not going to accept it, there's nothing I can do. And I'm going to develop the skillful means as best I can to be able to communicate that. And that's going to change over time. Hopefully it's going to improve, but I got to abide with that. So that's trying to put it into context with this system. So to draw this point, and then we can talk more about it now. So this last point of the mind, the non-virtue of the mind is wrong view. And I said the wrong view of not realizing that there is this law of reciprocity. There is this law of karma. So the virtue of that is engaging in the perfect meaning. What is the perfect meaning? What is the meaning of this life? We have to answer that. So is the answer liberation? As it says right here in The Precious Human Life on page 1 of the prayers that we recited today, it says, when one obtains a body which is easily lost, do not waste it meaninglessly, but rather use it to attain ultimate liberation, joyous result. So we have to find the ball and keep the eye on the ball. So what do you think of that?
Got to keep looking for the ball.
So
I
you
think you
don't,
pulled it together pretty good at the end.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I think you pulled it together pretty good at the end.
Yeah, we have to put this into a context. We have to realize that there's this system of Dharma that we're trying to understand. And our egos are flying around like crazy in the process. But that's okay. What we need to be able to do is to recognize all this and exhaust it and get to the point that we rest.
Well, thank you for your patience with the, with these departures from the.
I'm in the middle of it too. I'm in it with everybody, it's we're all in this together.
Yeah. Well.
So you help me, I help you.
Lance, in Christianity, I've heard the saying, like hate the sin, love the sinner, distinguishing it that way, which is sort of contradictory to what you're saying, but.
Well, no, you have to love everybody. You have to love each other. We can't lose that. We have to see each other as Buddha in potential. All these beings are all Buddha. They may not recognize it, but that doesn't stop us from recognizing it. Doesn't stop me from recognizing it or you from recognizing it. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the perfection. That's what we're trying to do. The perfection is being on the path, to be able to do that. So the key to this is contemplation and meditation of getting past our ego. Letting go of the 3 obscurations. I don't know if I've ever said this to you. There's 3 obscurations that human beings have to deal with. The first one are their emotions. And we've talked about the 5 poisons that are the basis of those 84,000 emotions. The next one is mental obscurations, mental misconceptions. Mental misconceptions are ideas that because I think it, oh, it must be true. And then the third one is habitual tendencies. There's things that we are kind of blind to, but if we pay attention to our habitual tendencies, if when we're in these situations, I always act like this, I always say that, and it reveals what my virtue is and what my non-virtue is. And we can see that that can change. I've always been doing this and acting non-virtuously. My habitual tendency is to get mad, to get angry, to say something divisive, to want to steal that or something. That's my tendency to want to do that. But then I can overcome that. Now I'm past that. And now my habitual tendency is to be generous. Now my habitual tendency is not to lie. Now my natural tendency is to be harmonious. So those three things are obscurations. So this is part of the ball, looking at the ball, liberation. If we can agree, if you wanted to come, would you want to, you got to ask yourself this question, do you want to come back to this life? And if you do, how do you want to come back?
Tell it, brother. Tell it.
What's that?
Tell it, brother. Tell it.
How do we want to come back? So, and that's what the Buddha said, when people were asking him, what was my past life? He says, well, what you got now is the result of your past life. The question you should be asking is, what do you want your next life to be? And is there something beyond this? Not to create this carrot for us all. We don't know. But is there a fourth dimension? Is there a fifth dimension? Is there 16 dimensions that we are just completely unaware of? But is this where we want to be? Would you want to be here the rest of your life? Well, you are here the rest of your life, but would you want your life to be eternal and be here? It's an interesting question, isn't it? So Buddhism is a system to liberate ourselves. What do you think the other systems are? The other, spiritual systems, are they not some kind of a system to liberate themselves, to go to heaven, to meet God, to wind up in hell, whatever, it's a system, there's a morality system, something that's beyond the physical and the intellectual. There's something else, which all predisposes that this is chaos, confusion.
Lance, have you, in your journey, I guess your human journey, have you had to recognize generational patterns of suffering in your own family and then say, oh, wow, this is my parents' karma coming into my life, and now I'm having to make a decision to?
Well, it's a good question, and we didn't get to the second page I wanted to get to, but you only have your own karma. You don't have somebody else's karma. You can't transfer karma. Now you can take on somebody's karma if you want. You can take on the result of their choices if you want to, and that becomes causes for your karma. Do you understand the distinction there?
All right, so if you grow up in a household where people abuse each other, right? So I watched someone abuse my mother, and now like you see these patterns. You're saying like because that was modeled for you. That's all you saw as a
Right.
live model, and then you begin doing what you saw and believed to be
Exactly.
appropriate. You're saying that is only your karma because that's ultimately your choice to engage in that action.
Correct.
Got it.
And I'll tell you, my parents, would argue, and my father would yell and really, cut somebody down. And I find myself doing that. And but I've had to stop. I realized that I was modeling that behavior. But it's not who I want to be.
So I think there's an argument to be made that if you grow up in a household where that is the behavior, that becomes your, what did you say a moment ago?
Causes.
Your ingrained habitual tendency. Right?
Well,
And you have to realize that that's not who you want to be in order to change your behavior.
True.
Right. But I think initially, who was it who was saying earlier, you're born and everything's okay, and then you got to start changing your own diapers. I think sometimes you are not born into something that is okay.
Yeah.
True.
And it is not your, I would argue that it is not your karma. It's not your decision. It's not anything you put into place.
See, I would
It
argue
is
that.
inherited.
No, I would argue that.
Rebecca, I disagree with you. I think it is your karma if you're
It is
born.
your karma.
It is your karma. Like you must have done something else if you're reborn into like
But
maybe.
all right, so that's a way to see the cyclical nature of it. But in terms of what you have chosen and what actions you've taken in this life, because I'm not quite at the point that I buy that this is a repetitive event, right? Then I don't think you can hold someone accountable for creating something that they had no hand in unless you accept it.
Well, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but I think next week we're going to explore the second page because it goes into these little bit more minutia of responsibility and understanding that. And it's very important. We can't really move on to the next topics without getting some kind of a reference point to come back to continue the investigation. Because the Buddha said, don't take my word for anything. Investigate it on your own. So what we're doing is learning the tools to investigate.
I just want to share that Tom, as your counterpoint, he always seems to be positioned right next to you in my Zoom box. And you will say something extremely insightful, and Tom will smile and nod. I'm just like, all right, well, he just made a good point, I guess. It's like punctuation or like a little flashy thing in the background. It's fun.
Well, this is all practice. This is all practice. You have the opportunity to go one way or the other way. There's supposedly three paths. There's the tough path, and there's the easy path where everything's given to you. And then there's the middle path, which Buddha chose. And you have the opportunity to do that. You can make your choices, and the way that you make your choices put you in a position for the next choice. And each choice becomes easier as you go along. But you have, when you first are starting out, it's very difficult to make that choice, because if you're 20 years old, for 20 years, you've been doing all these random acts of probably unkindness and selfishness. And it's not being selfish anymore. It's being unselfish, which it gets very difficult, because being unselfish appears to be selfish because you're doing things to help everybody else, but in turn, that's helping you. So it's
the quantum physics of it,
exactly.
you know. We change that which we observe. So are we observing it with virtue or with non-virtue? All right, well, thank you very much. You know, we're accumulating wisdom, and we're accumulating skillful means to be able to articulate the wisdom. Believe it or not, these conversations are very important. And this is why, brothers and sisters, because we share this aspiration to want to understand these things. You know, if there's, I don't know how many people are here, 10 people here right now or so, and, you know, what other 10 people could you have this conversation with? You know, so thank goodness that we have each other to have this conversation. And this helps us to have the conversation with ourselves. When, as William is saying, that we go into practice, that we're bringing this in. So we're developing the wisdom, we're accumulating the wisdom, and we're accumulating the skillful means to be able to apply the wisdom. So this takes time. It takes brotherhood, sisterhood, for us to be able to share this and be able to have permission to be able to think about these things and talk about these things. So what we're doing is a really good thing. This is a very special thing. All right, so unless somebody has something really burning to say, let's do our dedications. Tom? Short dedication, maybe.
Sure. Just do the Korma prayer. By the virtues collected in the 3 times, by myself and all beings in samsara nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Sri Kungpa Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, Master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara. Om Ahum. Om Ahum. Om Ahum. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful teaching.
Well,